Okay, today I have the great pleasure to get to know somebody who's introduced to me by Markus Reuter. He's part of an interesting little collaboration crew, and I was really excited to hear about his music. I listened to it, and I really got drawn in, and then I heard about how he's working with different systems, and it drew me in even further. So I had to get a chance to talk to him. So with that, I introduce Erik Emil Eskildsen. Hey, Erik, how's it going?
It's going well. Hi, Darwin. Lovely sunny day here in Vienna. Yeah, which is a rare thing in winter.
Yeah, well, good for you, because I'm in Minnesota and it's gray as steel. So I'm wishing I was there right now. So thanks a lot for taking the time to join us in the podcast. This is really great to have you on board. Why don't we start off by having you talk a little bit about your work?
Okay, I've been playing music since I was about close to 9 years old, and I turned 35 last year, and I started out as a bass player. So at the beginning it was all about, playing the bass, playing in groups and playing with people. And so I come from parents that were young in the 60s, so I know all the old good stuff. And so I used to play rock, and I used to play things that are a lot less complicated in some way than what I do now at this time in my life. And then stuff gradually extended into other things. And eventually I found myself playing guitar. And at some point that became a stick. And then eventually I ended up meeting Markus Reuter and started playing the touch guitars U8. And that has for a long time been a very essential part of what I do. And I also do soundscapes and looping and things like that. But for me, obviously, like just playing the instrument was never really enough. And it was like that also, even when I played bass, I wanted to find something different. And I wanted to extend the possibilities of my instrument into other sounds and things that are generally not really possible just with an instrument on its own. So the obvious progression was to start working with electronic music and different variants of that, which meant that I, of course, started working with a computer quite extensively. Once you start working with a computer, you have all these amazing amounts of possibilities that are available. The thing is that for me, I've always had this tendency to think, so I remember when I was a kid, I had this feeling that I could hear all the other things that were supposed to be within this piece of music that I was playing on my instrument, So I always built like these systems and, networks of things within my head. And obviously, when you start working on a computer, this becomes very easy to realize. So I started going very deep in how I could use particularly Ableton, which has always been like my main compositional tool as well. And like how I could use that to start building like systems that would react in certain ways and allowing me to compose music in a way that's not entirely determined by what I do. I mean, that's kind of wrong to say that because I have a lot of impact on the actual process that happens. But like allowing for things to happen by themselves. Like a very essential part of my compositional technique is the use of random and chance. And, so building systems that allow me to use these possibilities. And like just misusing different techniques that software allows me to do to, generate new voices of something that's already recorded, I remember how happy I was when Ableton introduced this audio to MIDI conversion feature. And so I started using that very extensively to like really manipulate sound and then extract information from it, right?
Sure.
And generally, like what I do, everything that I do, there's always this kind of thing in the background, which is like the beginning point that can either be like just a piece of recorded music, which I then start manipulating and start extracting everything that I can from it, which, could be rhythm, or it could be simple tonal content, or dynamics, etc. And then I extract that. So that's like one direction. Another direction would be to simply just like build a system with different combinations of sequences and like MIDI filtering and randomization, etc. And then treating this system in different ways and getting results out of it. And, then in the end, it's all about knowing when it's right.
I did a little bit of digging on you before I called you up for the podcast. And you actually seem to be really into this idea of systems. And
yes,
systems, whether it's, so you have a YouTube channel that's literally called Modulars plus Pedals.
Yes,
if I have
correct.
that right, where you put together
Modular plus Pedals. Yes,
Modular plus Pedals, yes. And you make little sort of self-running systems using a combination of modules and pedals. But it also sounds to me like that's kind of how you use Ableton too, as sort of like a software modular system that you kind of manipulate.
Of course, yeah, you already mentioned it. Yeah, so when you work like I do, then at some point it becomes incredibly obvious that you should get into modular synths.
Right.
Because it's like the same thing you're doing, but you just can do it with your hands, and it's right in front of you, and it's so immediate, and it just happens way quicker somehow when I work with my modular system. Yeah, so exactly. I kind of work the same with basically everything that I work with, which also extends into, because I of course also play guitar, so I also play with a ton of pedals. Right. And then it's kind of like the same thing that happens again, although of course, the possibilities in terms of patching things within a pedal board is not the same as with a modular.
Well, it's not, but conversely, the input from a guitar is much more complex than a lot of what you'll use as input to a modular system. So there's a different place where the complexity comes from, right? Exactly.
Like a guitar is, with the right choice of sound processing, you can turn a guitar into an incredibly complex oscillator, of course. And also because of the whole way you play the instrument, there's so many layers that can come just from, and I know this sounds crazy coming from somebody that uses as much processing and technology as I do, but like there's a lot of sound in your hands as well on a guitar, The thing about when I work with these self-generative patches in modular, I kind of have the feeling that while I'm setting up the patch, I'm not really going for a specific sound, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
I have this compositional idea that I want to achieve with the system. So as I'm patching, I'm not really thinking about sound too much. Maybe there's a new oscillator that I just bought that I really want to use because I really like it and it's new, Or maybe I have this really clear idea of how I would like the thing to sound. But generally, like I'm kind of composing the piece as I'm doing the patch. Yeah, so like I go for the composition within the piece, and this again is kind of like probably a little bit in the gray zone, because it's still like a generative piece. But I have the feeling that due to how I patch it together, I'm still composing the piece.
Right.
Which again would be the same, I could say, about how I work within Ableton. Although I'm setting up something that will react to whatever happens, the way I do it is still, the composition. Yeah.
Right. So there's actually kind of a interesting history of people who work this way. And generally what they talk about is that one of the key roles then is the role of being of being the editor. Because doing this stuff, you can conceivably produce 24 hours of music every 24 hours, right? But that's not necessarily helpful because there still is, it's not an automatic process. There still is the process of finding the material that you consider the key material, refining it to be something that you want to turn into a release, and doing those steps. What For you, what are the things in that editing process that jump out for you? What are you listening for when you're going through material trying to choose what's going to be part of a release?
Okay, so this is an interesting question because I kind of don't really work like that much anymore. I used to do that a lot, like I would improvise, or I would have a system that would run and I would just let it run and let it record and just listen to it, or maybe not even listen to it while it's recording, but only listen to it afterwards. And then I would do exactly what you're saying. Like I would go in and I would sit down and I would start selecting, and then it would be basically mostly based on, do I like this or do I not like this? Does it work together with the other parts? Like obvious stuff. But in the later years, I've come to a point where I kind of do this selective process before I record. I don't know if you understand what I mean. Like, so I will work so much on the system that I know that once I press record,
yes,
it's gonna do what I want it to do. And like that's exactly what I mean when I start talking about I compose the patch. So I'm composing the piece. Or if it's within Ableton, then I'm like composing the system that will work. I'm not entirely sure when that happened, this transition, but I think it might really have something to do with the fact of, no, I do not want to have 10,000 hard drives laying around with material that I recorded, because at some point either they are going to corrupt, or I'm going to lose them, or they won't work, which has happened.
Or you're going to lose your mind just worrying about having to go through it all, right?
Exactly. And so, because and another reason why this transition has happened is probably also because I play a lot of improvised music, where like if this has to work, I need to make it work. I can't just afterwards go in and say, no, this performance was terrible, so I will now select what the audience can actually listen to, because I can't do that because it already happened.
Sure. Now, when you're playing, how interactive are you with the system? Do you have like with the modular? Do you have like touch plates and stuff that you're working with, or? I mean, obviously, when you're doing the guitar, you're activating the guitar. But with the modular system, how much are you interfacing with it while it's playing?
It depends on what it is. If it's the video series I have on YouTube, it's all the time. It's like something that just runs by itself. Okay. Also because I kind of went for that aesthetic. Like I wanted to be this simple piece of music that you can see that there's no interaction. It's just happening, And a lot of the other things that I do with modular is like really like that. I just let it work. But in some cases, if I have worked on a patch for a very long time and it's intended to be a release and not just a part of a video, not to say that the music that I do in my videos is of less quality than the releases I do, but if it's intended to be a release, then I will start modifying tiny things and adjusting, but not that much, it's more like maybe if there's a filter, I will close the filter a little bit, or I will open it, or, I would make a release slightly bit longer, like tiny things. Sure. I'm not really, I don't even have like touch plates and things like that, which I would love to have something like that, but I'm not really interacting that much with the system.
Okay. Because one of the things that I would say, having listened to your stuff, I mean, you do a great job of sound design, but there's also sort of a narrative to it that kind of gave me the sense that you were playing it, because it comes off like a player driving the system, right? And so maybe that's what is happening as part of this like intentional setup. That allows that to happen instead of necessarily having to be super hands-on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a very good explanation. I couldn't really, I don't know if I can say that any better. There's a lot of time invested into making it work, so it will take time.
Right.
And it will take a lot of different tries, but I don't record until it's at the point where I'm satisfied with how it works.
Sure. So then that makes me ask the next obvious question. You also do live performances?
Yes.
How do you bring these kind of systems into a live performance environment in a way that is satisfying?
Okay, so in terms of the modular system, I still haven't had a performance with it, and I'm still not entirely sure how I would do that. That would be something I would have to think a bit about. But in regards to performing live, I always perform with a guitar and some kind of something that I use to process that guitar. I have this guitar trio as well, which is basically just 3 guitars and a lot of pedals. So when it's with pedals, then it's all about how do I build this pedal board and what effects am I including and how am I using these effects together with each other and what kind of order am I using, because I will not always use a very orthodox order of effects. I might not do it in the normal way, if you know what I mean. You have the typical thing where you would go like compressor, distortions, modulation, delays, reverbs, which is like the simple thing. So I might not do it like that. I've had pedal boards where I basically had like 80% of the pedals that I were using were delays.
Uh-huh.
And just combining different types of delays and the things that you can get out of different types of delays that aren't really delays. So that I will build a pedal board for a specific performance and make sure that it will do the things that I feel like will be the right things for that performance, which can be, that can be something as simple as having some kind of idea of what kind of audience is going to be there or what is the room like, things like that, right? And then there's the other side of the coin, which is processing my guitar through Ableton, where I will use, like a complex looping setup within Ableton, which most of the times for me, it's like a very long delay. And then I manipulate that delay at different points within the, I was about to say patch again, but it's not really a patch. It's just a live set, right?
Well, it's sort of a patch, though, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Then I have a system that is actually kind of, so obviously because I've worked with Markus for a long time, I've studied with Markus Reuter as well. And so, of course, a lot of the things that I do when I use a computer and live looping within Ableton is in some ways very similar to what Markus does and how he works with it. But essentially, like it's a complex feedback system where it's possible for us to patch. Now I said it again. Where it's possible for us to patch signals back and forth from each other. So it's not just like going into a looper and then going to the output, but it's more like being fed to another looper and maybe back again.
Right.
And it can all be fed into each other. So it's not like your typical. So the feedback does not happen within the looper itself necessarily. It might happen between different tracks that are doing different types of processing.
Right.
So like a complex feedback system would be the nicest way of calling it.
Sure, that makes sense. I get it. Yeah.
Yes. And so that type of guitar processing, for me, most of the time will of course also be combined with the pedal board with certain pedals that I want to use for that particular sound. And then I will just have something running on the computer where I really also don't have to interact too much with it. I just let it run and then I play and I basically just react to what's happening.
Okay.
And sometimes you get surprised.
Indeed. Well, do you end up having to build like safety nets so that it doesn't go, again, mostly in a live environment? How do you, when you have these big feedback circuits, I do it some myself, but I'm always like a little nervous because when it gets on the edge, all of a sudden that's like that can be a little scary zone because all of a sudden you can like bring the house down pretty quick with a bad turn of events. How do you build like safety nets in that for yourself?
I mean, like, so the most obvious thing is to never feed a track onto itself. That would be the first rule
Right.
that I always use. I mean, unless it's passed through a different track first that modifies it enough so that it doesn't clash with the original output.
Right.
And then limiters. Since a long time, I stopped using just like simple limiters, and I use stuff that will like do soft clipping. So in case it does clip, it actually sounds kind of nice because it gets turned into a nice distortion rather than like clipping.
Right. If I have to think of like what my scariest performance situation is, there are the people with the no input mixers that all they do is play feedback. To me, that's like the fear zone. I get really nervous even thinking about that, right?
Yeah, my opinion about that is that I need to watch out what I say about that because but my opinion is conceptually it's very interesting. Yeah. And I enjoyed this idea about pushing a machine to get as much out of it as you possibly can.
Right.
Which is also like a very big part of what I do. Like a pedal will not necessarily do what it's supposed to do when I use it. I'm going to find a way to get something out of it which it's maybe not intended for.
Right.
So I really like that idea. I like this idea about pushing equipment and gear and technology to points that are not necessarily what they are intended for. And a no input mixer is a very good example of that. But the thing I have with this kind of music is that there's something lacking from me on a personal level. Like it's too much, in terms of volume, and it's too much in terms of how little change there can be in it. I mean, at least I haven't seen the right guy yet, if you know what I mean.
Maybe I'm suffering from the same thing. Now, one of the things you mentioned about that, though, that I find interesting is that sort of like the uncontrolled volume isn't something that interests you. And I think to me, what's interesting about your music, and especially as we're talking, is that you have this environment built around feedback, but your work seems to be all about subtlety. Your stuff tends to be not overly loud. It tends to be oriented towards subtle changes over time, which the looper world can be a different thing, which it can be very much about repetition, right? Your work tends to not be about that. But I think that some of that is Markus's influence on you. And some of it, though, seems to be, when I look at the pedals and the modules you gravitate towards, they tend to be these things that focus on changes over time. And I think that that's an interesting play because a lot of the tools you work with tend to be about a different thing, right? Guitar tends to be, when you look at the people that are like, quote, great guitarists, it's about how many notes they can do per second, right? And particularly in touch guitar, that's sort of like, hey, now I got two hands on a neck, so I can run twice as many notes, right?
Yeah.
And your music takes a very different approach. And when I watch the videos of you playing live, or I listen to the work that you've released, it's very much a different thing. And I'm wondering, what is it that's in your head that has like broken you away from the obvious things that both the instruments and the effects pedals and the tools would sort of tend to drive you toward?
So I still have this really amazing memory of being, I must have been like 13, and I'm sitting with a bass guitar, and I have this like incredibly clear understanding suddenly, or like not really understand, but like vision of the fact that everything fits, like all notes fit together, everything fits. Everything will fit together, but I had no idea how. It was impossible for me at that time to understand how. And a few years back, suddenly it hits me that I get this now. Like I can get anything to work together. And so the reason why I'm mentioning that is because that's like the same with everything else. So I want things to be continuously changing, because it has to be different. I have this fascination of allowing things to change and using that as something. I have a friend of mine. I showed him some of my compositions. This is material that I still haven't released, and like his first comment was, "Yeah, well, this is like part A, right?" And he was talking about the whole piece. So like there's no repetition, like exact repetition happening throughout the whole piece.
Right.
And so, of course, when I compose like that, with this concept of everything fits together and everything can change and everything can move, then I will look for any type of equipment or software or, any type of gear that will allow me to do this. And that's also why I was drawn to the instrument, the guitar, the touch guitar, because of this range that it has. And also because it doesn't have to be a bass and it doesn't have to be a guitar. And it doesn't have to be a piano, and it can be anything in between. And I can change very quickly from one part to another of the instrument. And I'm not stuck within a certain range or type of player. Also I play guitar because I compose. I don't compose because I play guitar. I used to, like when I was a kid and my understanding wasn't any better, I would sit down with a guitar or bass or whatever instrument, and I would compose on that instrument, and then I would start, maybe I can play this other thing and this and that, and so, that would be the way I was composing, but that has been gone for many years now. Sure. And so I love playing guitar, I love playing the touch guitar, and I feel so happy on that instrument, but it's definitely not about how many notes can I play. Right. Or how quick can I play it. It's about the melody, I think, which means that in its essence, it's really all about the music for me. And that might come off a bit strange when I use all the gear that I use and I use all the things that I use. But like essentially, it's the music, and I only do it for the music. So making the music, composing the music is the reason why I will use a certain thing. It's not because of how quick I can play on it or how much I can do necessarily with it. It's like, what is the music I can get out of this?
Right.
And I buy the pedals for the same reason. Like, what kind of music can I get out of this? Or like a module. It's all about what will it do for my music. It's not like, this would be cool to have this filter because that sounds like that and that synthesizer, etc., etc.
Yeah. Now, you said earlier that when you start working on this stuff, you don't necessarily come to it with a set sound in mind. But I'm wondering, since you kind of identify yourself, I mean, it sounds like you primarily identify yourself as a composer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you document your work for yourself in any way? And I'm curious about this. Right now I'm teaching a class, and I'm actually talking to them about like graphic scoring, right? And how you can use that to sort of document the work when the work is more about timbre than it is about the notes that you're playing, right?
Yes.
Do you do anything in terms of like note taking or scoring or anything like that, or do you just really have a hands-on approach in terms of creating the final piece? Okay,
so I have this bachelor in sound design, and during that bachelor I also studied electroacoustic composition, and so I've learned all these things, and I know about graphical scores and different variations of how you can notate, also even fixed media pieces, etc. So I know all the techniques really, but it's very rarely something that I use. I do take a lot of notes, which of course comes in very handy when you work with a modular system, because if you want to kind of recreate something, maybe at some point, or at least understand what it is that you did.
Right.
It makes sense to make patch notes. And that's also like on the YouTube channel, I actually supply patch notes with every video, because it's like, I would like people to understand what's happening. And because I'm not there telling them, then at least I can do the patch notes. So I will do patch notes of certain patches that I do. And of others, I will just not do it, because it's happening once, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen again. And then I take notes also when I'm working on pieces, like to remember things. But generally, I kind of remember most of the stuff that I do. And I know this sounds maybe a little bit arrogant, but I can kind of remember a lot of things. So I don't feel inclined to necessarily have to document everything. And, also like the recording in itself is also kind of like the documentation of the music. And also, of course, I keep all projects that, if I did something on a computer, then I have all the different variations that happened before the last one was the right one. And that's where the piece came from,
Right. Although a lot of what you do is using, when you use some of the pedals you use, there's not really any there's not an undo button on any of those things, right?
Exactly.
There's not a save button because they are really of the moment. And so if you're using the recording then as part of the documentation, it makes me then also wonder, on your releases, how often are you editing things together that were performed? Some of your stuff, very specifically, you say this was recorded in real time, so that the implication is you're not doing a lot of editing. The actuality is you saying you're not doing a lot of editing. But do you do work where you pull different ideas from different audio documents and do that as well? Or do you prefer sort of the performative aspect of doing it all at once?
So I have done that a lot, and some of the releases I have are like combinations of things. Some pieces I even like a recording I did way earlier, and then I found that recording and I saw like what I was saying at the beginning, I like to extract everything that I can extract from something and use it in different ways to create new layers and new parts and like create a bigger thing out of a smaller thing. Some things are a combination of something that comes from the past that I start using as a basis for something, for a new piece.
Sure.
But most of what I do now is really of the moment. And then again, like this comes back to this idea of working so much with the system that it will do what you need, so you don't have to take stuff away. So that means in a lot of cases, the only things that I do need to edit out are like clicks that happened, or if there was a glitch in the recording. And then I have to find a way to make it work. And sometimes it's very sad for me because like I have this, I kind of like the idea about letting it be as it was, in the form and not removing something. But sometimes I have to because there was a glitch in the recording, and I can't save it. I work with the Isotope RX, which is a very essential tool when you do stuff like this, I think, because it allows me to fix stuff that otherwise would have been impossible for me to fix.
Right, that would have been ruined, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like I'm not ever going to do stuff that's like really edited again, but for me, I like the way things are working towards the specific way of working where I compose everything so much that once it's recorded, it's actually, that's it,
Yeah.
And then, of course, then I will go in and I will start treating what I've recorded and but not destroying it so much that it doesn't maintain the form that it had.
Right.
So I will use one track of the recording and double it or do different treatments to it so that it becomes a new voice that still has a relationship to what it came from but becomes a new part of the piece, so within the piece in the same time. I'm not moving it around on the time frame. It's just it stays where it is. Sure. But it's a different sounding version. Right. And like generally that's something that happens a lot with what I do, that like there's all these layers of stuff, and that's probably why you hear this subtlety,
right?
Because there are so many layers that create new things that weren't there before. So there's things that appear that weren't necessarily in the original recording, but they appeared because of all this work that has gone into reusing that material. You know, the thing where you have certain notes and then overtones will appear? Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same thing, but with way more complex material.
Right. Done on purpose in a way, or done...
Yes. That's definitely, that's definitely a very important aspect. Although I do work a lot with random processes and chance and, these things, everything is very intentional, nevertheless.
So I want to take a little different question line here because we're already running out of time. And I really want to check in on something. So we're talking, you're in Vienna right now, but where are you normally based out of?
So my home is in Denmark, but I'm currently here because my wife is Austrian. So we are in Vienna at the moment.
Okay. You were actually introduced to me by Markus Reuter, but I know that you kind of interact with Markus and Tobias Reber and some of those folks. You guys have a little kind of cabal going there of different people working with each other, right? How do you interact with them? How often do you see and work with those guys?
It's so funny that you mentioned that because I just came back from Berlin yesterday. Okay. Right. So I visited Markus and stayed there and helped him out with because that's something I do also. Like I help people and friends also with technical stuff, which can be something as simple as building a pedal board or whatever,
Right.
So I was there spending a bit of time with Markus, helping him out, and then I also met Bernard Wöst-Heinrich, which is another one of these guys in this circle of friends and collaborators. He's a part of the band that Markus has, which is called Centrosun, together with Tobias as well.
You actually did a release with him, right?
Yes, exactly. I did a release with Bernard. This is already like quite a few years ago, which was based on improvisations that we did and recorded. And then I took those improvisations and I really extracted everything that I could from them. And then I orchestrated the whole thing and added a multitude of different new voices and drums as well. So most of that album is coming from me, but it's still a duo project. Right. And so with Tobias, I also have 2 releases with him, which they are also interesting stuff, very ambient. And so how do we interact? Well, we meet as often as we can, but the thing is, we are placed in so many different places around Europe, Right. And then there's life happening as well.
Yeah.
And so exactly. So sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a long time before you see each other again, but we are constantly communicating, online or chatting or calling each other or you're Skyping and everything. Sure.
Have you ever tried doing any virtual collaborations at all?
I mean, that's, a lot of the stuff we do is virtual because, so a little bit of backstory. Tobias and me, we got to know each other because we were both studying with Markus, guitar, touch guitar.
Right.
And there's a bunch of other guys also in this circle, which also are students of Markus's, also guitar people. Touch guitar students, and with whom I also collaborate with some of those, but currently not really, nothing particularly big happening. But so it's a very big group, is what I want to say, and we are all in very different places. So sometimes the only way to collaborate is to do a virtual collaboration. So that means that maybe if we have the possibility to meet up, we will record something that can be like the beginning point. And then we will start sending stuff back and forth. I'm working on another album, like an EP with Tobias right now, which has been back and forth online. We haven't been able to work on that together in person. And it's all about the music. So whatever way is possible to make it happen, we will find a way, I guess.
Sure. Well, Erik, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. This is really fantastic to be able to talk about this, learn more about your process and system. I think you have a really fascinating approach at making music. And your latest releases have been really quite amazing. Thank you. Yeah, I've had a chance to dig into them a little bit. And for people, well, the most recent one, the Forest of Unending Warmth, was just like really caught my attention in a beautiful way. But hopefully people will take the opportunity to head over to your Bandcamp site and check them out.
Yes.
And again, your YouTube channel is called Pedals, Modular and Pedals?
Modular plus pedals.
Modular plus pedal. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
The dreaded plus sign.
Yeah. I had to do it like that because it was, it just felt right.
Right. Sure. There you go. So hopefully people take the opportunity to check that out as well.
Yes.
But thank you so much for having the chat, and I hope that we'll get a chance to talk again soon, or maybe to meet at some soon point.
That would be wonderful, Darwin, and I'm very thankful for you wanting to talk with me. I have a lot to say.
There you go.
So,
indeed.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Many thanks to Erik for having the chat. It was really great to hear about what he is doing with sound design, kind of his process. Really fun to check out. If you want to learn more about him and his work, you can check out his website or his Bandcamp site. They're both based off of the eeskildsen.com or eskildsen.bandcamp.com. Check it out. Try out his music. If you need links, they're all on the podcast launch page. I also want to take this opportunity to mention something. My employer, Cycling 74, is having an expo. What is the expo? Well, it's an educational and a social event for Max users, and it's taking place for 3 full days in late April. You'll be inspired by the people that are there, plus you can meet me and my coworkers and tons of other Max users. So if you're interested in that, take a look at the cycling74.com website. I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing there. I've been working on the workshop presentations and stuff, and there's going to be some phenomenal stuff. Check it out. See if you have an opportunity to come. If so, I'd love to see you. If you have any questions about it, drop me a line. Or if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about the podcast, also let me know. ddg@cycling74.com or ddg@20objects.com or darwin.gross@gmail. All those things will work. Track me down, send me a note. Otherwise, great to know that you're listening, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Have a great one.